and welcome back to my channel. So if you have been around for a while, then you might know what time it is. It's time for a language log update. So for those of you who haven't been around, I have been using a language log since February of 2018, so I am past 3 years doing this at this point, and it is basically a way for me to track work on the foreign languages that I am studying. Now, that probably sounds a little bit more ambitious, I guess, than it really is. So the reality is one, I love studying languages. I live in a foreign country, I speak several languages, and so it is one of my hobbies and also passions in life to learn and speak other languages. So one of the ways that I make this a priority in my life is by tracking what I actually do. However, this does not mean that I actually spend hours and hours every single day or even every week working on my language studies. That is just not the case. So one of the things that I wanted to do with this particular language log update, since it's been a little while since my last one, is to kind of check in about how things are going and also just to kind of recap what I actually do on the regular. So first things first, once we go over to the table, I'm going to show you inside all of the notebooks that I use or have used. And let's be real, there are a couple that I don't use as much as I should or as much as I would like to. There are certain activities that I've kind of let fall to the wayside, and we're going to chat about that. So don't worry, that will come a little bit later. I will show you inside all of my notebooks. So before we head over to the table, I did want to chat about a couple of things. So one of them is every time I do some kind of a language content video, there's usually at least one or two comments that are along the lines of, how do you have time to do all of this stuff? Or why do you bother doing all of this tracking? It seems like a waste of time when you could actually be studying. And these are kind of two comments in the same sort of family, even if it feels like the intent is a little different. So I wanted to kind of address them because honestly, it does seem like I do a lot more language studies than I probably actually do. And I wanted to talk about that. So first of all, you need to understand that the notebooks that I show you in these language log updates, these are things that I have kept up for several years at this point. My language log notebook, I started in February 2018, and I just fill it in a little bit every day, month after month, year after year. So it looks like a lot of data, and it is, but it is something that takes me, honestly, 30 seconds to fill out every day. The monthly log style that I use is very, very simple. I literally write the date, and I write 1 through 30, 1 through 31, however many days are in the month. And then I have a set color code that doesn't change. My monthly log setup honestly takes me 5 minutes, and filling it out every day takes about 30 seconds. So in terms of taking a lot of time to set things up, that side doesn't take a lot of time. But what is really nice is I have seen over the course of the 3 years that I've been doing this, where I have sort of peaks and valleys in my studies. So for example, I know that around December, it's going to drop way off because I'm on holidays. Usually that's going to be the time when I see my family, and so I don't want to focus on language studies. I want to spend time with my family because I live overseas. I also tend to have a slump. Actually, like honestly, September through December is usually a bit of a slump because it's going back to school and then we have holidays, and a lot of times when it's possible, I travel during my October holidays and then I see family in December. So there's kind of a slump around there. It's going to peak back up again kind of end of May through June and July because that's the wrap up of the school year and I'm on summer vacation. So it's really interesting for me to see that sort of trend throughout the year. And it honestly, because I have 3 years worth of data at this point, it's something that comes up every single year. And so when I'm like, oh, I haven't done anything this month, and I look and I'm like, oh, it's September, duh, of course, it's going back to school. I never do that much in September because I'm busy, I'm stressed, like I don't have the time. So that is one of the reasons why I really like having this monthly log, even if there are honestly several weeks that will go by that I don't really fill anything out. The other thing is, I like having the monthly log because one of the sort of cornerstones of my particular language study practice, if you will, is I attempt to make languages a part of my daily life. So I know from years and years of experience and from years of studying languages that I don't do super well if I have or if I try to have a really structured study schedule. That's just not how I prefer to learn. I am one of those people who was a good student. I knew what to do to get good grades and all of that, but that is not actually how I learn as a person. Like, there's the side of me that's a good student, and then there's a side of me, how do I actually ingest and reuse information? And for me, it is repetition in like a daily practice over a long period of time. So for me, that means I want to listen to music in foreign languages. I keep up Spanish and French by reading. I have friends that I speak with in Spanish. I use French for work. I watch K-dramas. I really try and work it into sort of my daily life. I rarely sit down and go, I'm going to study Italian today. That's just not the way it works. I will if I have a class. So for example, right now I'm actually taking online Italian classes, but it's a third of let's study grammar things and do that, and like 2/3 of, okay, let's have a chat and see, like, actually use the language, and then I'll correct like any sort of grammar mistakes that you have, and let's work on this particular document. So lately we've been working on music and short stories. So I'm getting, oral comprehension. We're also using the songs as a way to practice intonation and pronunciation, because I have a really strong tendency to fall back on my Spanish pronunciation as opposed to really focusing on Italian. And so if you were to look at what I do in my Italian classes, I don't write down a lot of notes. I do have certain things, like when we get on a particular topic and my teacher gives me a bunch of different vocabulary, yeah, sure, that happens once in a while. But a lot of the time, we really just spend time talking, and she lets me talk about whatever's been going on in my week, things I like, and all of that. So I talk a lot about work and sewing, because that's my life, like, let's be real. So even when I'm doing classes, I am not sitting down and necessarily memorizing verbs. Like, there is a part of language study that you have to do that when you're a beginner, but that's the part that I like the least, and it's the part that I attempt to get past as fast as possible, because I just don't care for that part of it. I much prefer the part where I sort of make the language part of my daily life, and I do things in my daily life that allow me to use that language. So one of the ways that I use a language, and I don't actually track it in my language log, is when I talk to myself, because let's be real, I talk to myself, I live alone, I spend a lot of time by myself. Like, if I didn't talk to myself, who would I talk to? Anyway, so when I talk to myself, I actually use a rotating set of languages. So I will talk to myself in ASL, I will talk to myself in Spanish, in French, in Italian. When I watch K-dramas, for example, I try and say as much as I can in Korean. I really try and use the language as part of my daily life. So that kind of leads into how much time do I actually spend on my languages every day or every week. Right now I have a routine where I do one Talk to Me in Korean lesson on the weekend, and I'm actually currently, I finished level 5 at the end of March, and lately I have been just doing review lessons where I basically go back and I listen to lessons that I had already previously studied. Because, as we know, I do not like to study by sitting down with my notebooks and revising stuff over and over. It's just not the way that I work. And so even though I'm at level 5 and Talk to Me in Korean and I have all of these bits of information in my brain, I can't necessarily actually use that information. And so one of the ways that I like to kind of do a refresher is I go back and I re-listen to lessons. So that is one thing that I do every week. Those lessons take between 5 and 25 minutes long, so that is about the amount of time I spend doing that. I also have an hour-long Italian class every Friday. That is going to be going on for 10 hours. I think we're on lesson 5, so I'm about halfway through at this point. So I have an hour's worth of Italian class. I also usually have between 10 and 45 minutes of Italian homework that I work on kind of throughout the week. And it might be something, so this week it was going back through the story that we had started reading together, and I started looking up the words that I had underlined while we were reading that I didn't really understand or that I wasn't sure I understood. So that honestly was my homework. I wasn't even doing exercises, it was just looking up vocabulary. In terms of sort of scheduled study time, those are my two. The other thing that I do is I read currently in Spanish, but I typically read in Spanish or in French before bed. So I pick a book and I work on that and I read in that language until I'm done, and then I usually will switch to another language. So currently I'm reading The Diary of Anne Frank in Spanish, and I read between 5 and 25 minutes before I go to bed. I typically will read 1 or 2 diary entries before I go to bed, and that is one that, because I'm reading in bed, I almost never look up words that I don't understand. I have enough knowledge just in both French and in Spanish that I can usually get like the main idea based on context clues. I really don't worry about understanding every single solitary word because I just really want to get this practice. So if you have ever read any of Malcolm Gladwell's books, one of them, and I have to look up which one it is, one of them talks about the fact that to become an expert in a field, you need 10,000 hours of practice. I don't know if this is still supported by more recent studies, but it is something that makes a lot of sense to me, and so I do kind of go with that, where it's this idea that you're never going to get good if you don't spend a lot of time doing it. And a lot of time doing it sometimes means I'm going to read something and I'm going to look up every word I don't understand. Most of the time, however, it's going to mean I'm going to take whatever knowledge I already have, I'm going to attempt to pick a book that is within my my skill set as it stands right now, and I'm just going to read. And what I've noticed is that the more I do that, even without looking up words, the more I read in Spanish or in French, the easier it is. The faster it is, the more I understand, the more I can get into kind of a flow with things and all of that, the more just writing, a block of writing in another language makes sense to me. And so that's one of those things that I use that time before I go to bed. I read. I never pick a book that I just can't understand. It's always something that is within my wheelhouse, something that I am going to be able to understand 80 to 90% of, but I also am not fussed if I don't understand every single word. Like, I just kind of keep going, if you will. The exception would be if there's a word that comes up like 5 or 6 times and I really just don't quite get it in context, I will try and remember to look it up the next day. But it's pretty rare that I actually do that. So let's say I do, 15 minutes of reading every single night. I do 20 minutes of a Talk to Me in Korean lesson on the weekend. I have an hour of Italian and say 20 minutes of Italian homework. That's not very much over the course of a day. I also have a couple of things that are more sort of passive activities. So for example, a lot of times I will listen to music in foreign languages. So I have, and I might have mentioned this in a previous video, I have a playlist of some of my favorite albums from artists in different languages. So I've got albums in Korean, Spanish, Italian, and Arabic. So Arabic is a language that I studied back in university, and I have never really gotten back into like the real studies of it, but I do try and keep up sort of my ear for the language a little bit by listening to music. Also, I just love music in Arabic. So I have those 4. You will notice that I don't actually have any music in French in this playlist, and that is because I don't really care for a lot of music in French. Don't come at me. So I have actually one artist that I really like, but I like her older stuff. And so I don't typically listen to music in French. I also typically don't watch a lot of TV in French either. I read in French a lot and I use French for work. And so that's kind of the content and the access that I have to that. But in terms of music, I listen to those 4 languages, and I listen to, honestly, the same albums over and over and over and over. And the more I get comfortable with them, the more I try and sing along, the more I try and decipher what is being said and all of that. With certain languages, so specifically with Italian and Spanish, I'm able to decipher and sing along to a lot just because I have more of a foundation in both of those languages, whereas with Korean and Arabic, I try and pick out words and I kind of sing along as much as possible, but I definitely don't understand nearly as much in either of those languages because 1, my level is much lower, and 2, I don't have the same sort of context clues that I have when I'm dealing with something like a romance language, just because I have so much more experience speaking and understanding romance languages. So those are some of the things that I do for my language studies, and those are the main things that I do for my language studies. I will sometimes go on a kick where I do lessons on Duolingo, or I try to watch more in YouTube or various things like that. But realistically, I am not the most organized studier, if you will. I'm not going to have flashcards. I don't typically take a text and work through it and look up every single word that I don't know. It's very rare that I actually do that. And that was an intentional choice. So for me, learning languages is something that I do for fun and because I love it. Now, it is something that I am, I will say, good at because I do speak several languages. However, I know that 1, my goal is not to learn as many languages as possible. I always have some new language. I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be so cool to learn or whatever. But I do ultimately, I will have kind of put feelers out with a bunch of different languages, and then I kind of will bring it back in and I'll focus on kind of 2. So right now my 2 are Italian and Korean. At some point I would love to learn German. At some point I would love to learn Greek. I would love to go back and learn more Arabic because at some point I was actually able to carry on simple conversations, and I'd love to get back to a point with that. But I also know that the way for me to keep doing this is a lifelong thing. I've been learning languages for many years, and in order for this to stay something that is fresh and something that I love to do is I very intentionally focus on the activities that I really like, knowing that in doing so, it's going to take me longer to get to a conversational point with these languages. And I'm fine with that. You know, if ever I move somewhere and I need to use the language, I actually can get pretty far in a pretty short amount of time. So for example, with French, I started learning French in August of 2013, and I moved to France in October of 2014. And I basically took about 5 months of class. By the time I finished class, I had like an A2 level, and then I came to France and I just started using it. But that was possible because one, I knew I was going to move to the country and I absolutely needed the language. Me needing to actually use the language like on the ground is the biggest motivator that I could possibly have to actually learn a language. And one of the reasons why for other languages that I really like, but I know I'm probably not going to go there soon, it takes me a lot longer. The other thing is with French, I had a basis, and so it made a lot of sense. Like I typically, anytime I'm studying a Romance language, I tend to fall back on what I know in other Romance languages to help me out. So for example, with my Italian studies currently, I will take notes in English, Spanish, and French, depending on what clicks in my brain first. And like, that's just how I make those connections with the language. So I'm gonna be slower at learning a language, and it is gonna take me a lot longer to get to kind of a conversational point, but that's kind of intentional. I have a full-time job, I post YouTube every single week, I have other hobbies that I want to do. I just don't have the time in my schedule or the need to find the time in my schedule to study for 2 or 3 hours every single day. That just isn't what would bring me the most enjoyment. And so, long story short, long explanation. Basically, the notebooks that I show you all are the accumulation of several years of studies, and on the things that look like they maybe took more time to write down in terms of notes, that's to help me because I don't like doing those kinds of studies, and so having sort of prettier notes makes it more legible for me. It makes it more likely that I'm going to go back and look at it, and it helps me kind of keep it in my brain when I'm actually writing it down. But that's a very small percentage of the language studies that I actually do. So if you are starting to learn new languages, I would definitely recommend that you find some way to connect to the culture. That honestly is the biggest indicator of whether or not I'm going to stay with the language or not. So for example, I started watching K-dramas and I remember this so clearly. A friend of mine got me into K-dramas, and I started watching. I was like, oh my gosh, I love these, but I am not going to learn Korean. I don't need to learn Korean. I'm just gonna watch the K-dramas and I'm just gonna be fine with that because I'm currently working on Italian and I really want to get back to Arabic. I'm definitely not learning Korean. That lasted for about 2 months. Because after 2 months, I was like, I can't keep watching these and not learn more about the language. I can't keep watching these and not learn more about the cuisine and all of that. So even though I definitely don't have a conversant level of Korean, I actually incorporate the Korean language and also aspects of the Korean culture into my daily life. I cook a lot of Korean food. I actually have one of my most prized purchases is a Korean cookbook by MAANGCHI. If you are on the interwebs at all in like the cooking sphere, she is huge. Her videos are excellent. Oh my gosh. You know, I've tried my hand at making kimchi. I listen to K-pop a lot. I watch K-dramas. I took a Korean calligraphy class when I went to Korea. You know, I can't stop myself. If I have that connection to a culture and it just is something that I'm really interested in and I want to learn more about, there's no way I can not learn the language. It's just not in my makeup, which is one of the reasons why I will sometimes try and limit myself, because I know that if I start watching something in another language, then I'm going to want to learn the language, and I don't necessarily have the brain width to do that all the time. But finding that connection is great, and the second thing is find ways to work it into your daily life, because if I tried to just carve out an hour every day to study a language, I would never get anywhere, because that is just not what brings me joy in terms of languages. I much prefer making connections more organically over time. And I have the luxury of doing that because I don't need to use these languages fast, if you will, and the languages that I already have a certain level in, I find ways to kind of maintain them, but in ways that are fun for me. So watching YouTube, watching TV series, listening to music, talking to friends, that sort of thing, as opposed to just sitting down and studying. So, okay. intro is over. We are going to go and take a look at my notebooks. I have several notebooks to show you all, and we'll go and see the good, the bad, and the slightly neglected in terms of my language studies. So let's head on over. So I have a leaning tower of notebooks and various things to show you all. So let's go ahead and start with my language log, because that is kind of my anchor point for all of my different language studies. So I've been using this CHOOSETODO notebook cover for several years, and as you can see, I have kind of smaller notebooks than what will actually fit in here, but it's fine. It's fine. So we're gonna go ahead and just take out my language log. So here is my language log. As you can see, I did go ahead and put the archiving sticker on here just because I don't remember why, but I do actually already have this one with the archiving sticker, so I know that I started it in February of 2018. I have had these sticky notes in here for probably 2.5 years, and I just haven't really messed around with them yet. So I skipped the first page because it's just kind of annoying how it's glued down, so I just left that as sort of the fly page. And then I have my index. So the left page of my index are specifically my logs, and the right is for journaling. This middle section here is for my review trackers, specifically for Korean, and we'll take a look at those. And because I knew I was going to have more, I just went ahead and sort of blocked out the full line, but the rest of it I do on a column, because obviously I have a language log every single month, so I have a lot of things to actually index, and I haven't actually filled this in since July of 2020, and it is April of 2021. So I'm behind a little bit. I have done them, I just haven't actually indexed them. And then as you can see here, I've got journaling for Korean, Italian, Spanish, French, and German. Obviously had a majority of journaling in Korean and Italian, not very much in the other three. And I actually haven't done it in a while, but we will see that as well. So moving in, this was my very first tracker, and I have, so the way that I sort of track my information is I have a color code based on activity and a letter based on language. So this is my original color code. I've since changed it about, I don't know, like a year in, it changes to a different set of colors, and I think I've kept that since then. But I do study, read, write, watch, listen, and talk. And those, everything that I do kind of falls into one of those 6 categories. And if I want to be a little bit more specific, then I actually will just make a note over at the side here, because obviously I have kind of a lot of space on this page. And then the other one I have is for languages. So I originally put down for everything I could potentially want to study, including some newer languages that I wanted to work on. And this is the part that I've actually stopped doing, because I tend to have the same like 4 languages or maybe 5 languages that I mess around with. So originally I had French, Spanish, Italian, Korean, Arabic, German, ASL, and Qt speech. And I did this for a couple of months. I don't remember when I stopped, but it's not like super useful information, just because I know what languages we're talking about. And I use the same letters. So if I really wanted to see like what it was, I would come back here and check, because the letters never changed. As you can see here, my monthly tracker itself just is the month and the year and then the day and nothing else. I then just go straight into filling out my little boxes, and you can see here, this is the listen. So I listen to a lot of music. And then this was watching K-dramas, and I think this study was probably for Duolingo at the time. So I started out by having kind of all of this information, and then I also do a little picture of either from a K-drama or of an actor or a K-pop star that I like, just as sort of some visual interest. And because I started this more specifically when I started studying Korean, I just always have done K-drama or K-pop stars as opposed to other people, even though I do study other languages. It was just kind of my initial thing, and I just sort of have stuck with it because I like it. Then I also did, I transcribed the lyrics for one of my favorite 2 PM songs. I thought that I was going to do this more frequently, but honestly, this is the only time I've ever done it. But it is fun to have sort of a longhand handwriting sample from when I first was starting to learn to write in Korean. So that is kind of cool to have this. This is the first of my tracker pages. So I have Talk to Me in Korean Level 1 Review. So this is, I think my tracker is probably in my bullet journal from that time. But when I do a review, I basically will just like fill it in that I've done it. I don't really care about the date, but if it's actually a level I'm working on, I do write the date in, and then I have gone back and I did the year, just because I didn't actually do the year when I originally was doing these. So I have Talk to Me in Korean Review, Memorize, for level 1, memorize for how to study Korean, memorize for Talk to Me in Korean level 2 studies, and then how to speak Korean unit 1, which obviously these ones I never really got back to, but Talk to Me in Korean, well, that's because Talk to Me in Korean is kind of my preferred way to study, so that's what I then focused on. So I've just kind of left these trackers here knowing that I will never actually fill them out. So my monthlies all kind of look the same. And then here we have the first example of a journaling page. So what I do is anytime I do journaling pages, I do the entire spread just to kind of keep things together. Otherwise it would just be all over the place. So this is a full spread of Korean journaling. And as you can see, I started even like, it's so funny. If you look here to here, just my writing style of this letter, it has changed over the course of, this is like 10 days. Probably at some point around here-ish, I watched a video that kind of talked more about handwriting in Korean versus what you see when you actually like type on the computer. And all of my stuff is very, very simple. There's a lot of like, I couldn't even tell you how many times I have the sentence, I'm drinking coffee right now, or I studied Korean. Like, I think those are probably my 2 go-to sentences. So going back over here, and you'll notice that pretty soon after starting, I got into this rhythm of I always, whenever possible, sometimes it doesn't work out, but most of the time, since I fill this in kind of in the evening or the following morning, I will go through and I will fill everything in the order that I've got them here. And so you'll see like anytime I study Korean, it's always first, followed by reading in a language, which no, this is not reading, this is writing. So this was journal stuff, followed by listening, followed by watching. And I actually have kind of a preference. So I have since gone back and my order now is study, write, listen, watch, read, talk is the current kind of order that I do. And that's the order that I fill in here. And that is just my organizational tendencies, I guess. So you'll notice back in the day, I did a lot of journaling in Korean. I've since kind of fallen out of doing it, and it's really kind of due to the fact that I have a pretty solid journaling routine right now that I do in the morning. And if I don't do my journaling in the morning, very frequently I forget about it and it doesn't get done. So I just kind of haven't been doing the foreign language stuff, which should work on getting back to it, but that I think is going to be a project for summer, Caitlin. So this is my first set of journal pages in Italian. And you can see here that even with Italian, I have a little bit more facility with the written language. And so I have some more complex and like longer journal entries. And actually, funny story, this one has been corrected, like I think maybe 2 years later. It was corrected by a friend of mine who speaks Italian, and so I actually have some of the errors that I made have been corrected, which is really good. So back in Korean there. So this June, as I mentioned in the intro, summertime is where I get the most like studies done in general, and this is a really good one. I had this like massive streak going where I was doing Duolingo Korean and Italian. I was writing daily in Korean and Italian. I was listening to music in Korean. I was watching K-dramas, and I was reading in French at night before I went to bed. And like I kept up that streak for like 2.5 months or something before I was like, okay, I need a break. So more Italian. This was my first in Spanish. I think these are the only pages I have in Spanish, and obviously Spanish is kind of the first spoken language that I got really comfortable with, and so the journal pages are a lot longer. Korean, Italian, Korean. It's a lot of Korean, Italian, Korean, Italian, Italian again. And my streak kind of continued on over here, and you can see it start to drop off at the end of the month. Then Korean. A lot of the time, if I have longer entries, it's because I just did a Talk to Me in Korean lesson that day, and it gave me some good sentences, and I tried to make my own sentences based on what I learned. So I did actually used to do that sometimes, but it's been a while. Italian. And then I just have a little page flag because I refer back to these. So this, I had started doing tracker pages for Italian, but I don't actually do them anymore. So this one I'm keeping on until I finish the level 2 review tracker, and then I will move on to do level 3 review tracker. So Korean, Italian, Korean, just lots and lots of back and forth. And then you'll see here, like mid-August, I was like, okay, I'm going to be going back to work soon. Like, we need to stop. But I did keep up with listening to music in Korean and watching K-dramas in Korean. But I even dropped off, for example, on the like reading at night. I kind of stopped for a while as well. This was my French journal pages. I think the only ones that I did. Again, Italian, Korean, Italian. And then September things drop way off. And this was when I changed my order. So this is actually also the order that I still do to this day: study, write, listen, watch, read, and talk. And these are the same colors that I've been doing since September of 2018, apparently. So it's been like 2.5 years. At some point I might want to change that, but it's fine. So you'll see here, you know, October, I was on holiday at the end of the month. So I, you know, typically during my school holidays, especially if I was traveling, I probably traveled during this one, I will stop doing my language tracking for a while. So I do get breaks, and it's really like that September to December is where things kind of drop off the most. But even in November, I did some stuff, but like very sort of haphazard, and I, you know, didn't necessarily do things every day, and I didn't do all the things every day. So Korean, oh my gosh. And then again here, didn't do a whole lot of stuff. I do try and track whenever I listen to music in a foreign language just to kind of see, but honestly, it's the main music that I listen to. So I have a couple of playlists that have different albums from different languages. And so if I'm going to, if I listen to a lot in a day, I will write it down. If it's only a little bit, like it's one album on a playlist that I listen to on a loop, I might not, but that is something I do try and track just because it is passive listening. And I do find that music really helps me, especially with Italian. It's really helped me with kind of parsing out words, understanding pronunciation, and getting like the intonation of the language. So it's an important activity for me, which is why I do keep tracking it, even though it is, you know, listening to music. So February, wintertime, don't ever do a whole lot. And then this was when I started getting into, I try really hard to almost always have a book going in another language. Every once in a while, I'll finish a book or I'll take a break, or I'll actually pick a different thing to do at night before I go to bed. But typically I read in a foreign language. So it's probably my longest like off and on streak in general. So as you can see here, June immediately picks back up, like immediately picks back up. It's funny how that actually works. And I don't even remember, when did I stop doing the language? So I did it through May, June, July, August. So I did it for like 3 or 4 months where I labeled the languages here, and then starting from August 2018, I just stopped, and now I just do my color code, which is what I still do to this day. So July, again, end of July into August, things kind of drop off a little bit. So this is when, oh my gosh, this was October of 2019, and I actually went to Korea. So I labeled that on there, even though I didn't do a lot of like studies. And I actually probably could have written down that I spoke Korean, a little bit of Korean every single day, but like not very well. I don't know why I didn't put that in there. Anyway, but I know I went to Korea, and I know that I spoke in Korean to people as much as I could to like order food and go to stores and stuff. But yeah, that was such a good trip. So then November, back at school, and I basically just read at night before I went to bed. December, traveled, probably didn't bring my book. So yeah, that is kind of the way it goes. We were on lockdown, so that was why I had a weird spike in March, which normally I don't have as much stuff, but I was doing a lot of studies, and this is around the time that I made my playlist that has Korean, Italian, Arabic, and Spanish music. And at some point I kind of condensed it, but for a while I was doing each of them individually. So I have another one for Italian, and then I just like never finished it because I stopped writing in my journal. Then I have April, I was doing a lot of Duolingo. And here, this is where I started. Instead of having all 4, I just squished it down to KIAS is that particular album, and I listened to it on shuffle, and like that's one of my main language, like passive language listening activities that I do. Then this was German. I did literally 2, and then was like, okay, cool, we're done. Yeah, quarantine hobbies, you know. So May, went back to work, so that's why things kind of fell off, but then we were back on summer holidays, and so things picked up a little bit. July, same thing. So this is my latest tracker. So I finished Talk to Me in Korean level 5. I made the tracker for level 6, but I'm currently doing some reviews, so I'm not actually filling that out yet. I will need to do a level 3 review tracker at some point soon. I wonder if I could make it really small and like fit it down here, because it really doesn't need to be that big. So we have August, September, back to school, you know, October. It really does go in cycles, like for sure. So December is usually a lighter month in general. Got back into reading. So February, you might notice I reuse pictures. I have some pictures that I've saved from Google that I just will periodically reprint out a bunch of them and cut them out, and I'll just do them. So I pick my favorite pictures and I reuse them multiple times. So here is April. So as you can see, today is April 14th. So I filled in yesterday. I watched K-dramas and I read in Spanish before bed, and that was kind of all that I did. I don't even think I listened to music yesterday. So yeah, that is in here. So my next page is page 133, and there are, oh, I didn't actually finish them. I think there's like 150, 180 pages in here. So honestly, because I mostly use this for my trackers and I haven't done journaling in a while, this has lasted me for a really long time, which is also really nice because then I can see like the progress over time without having to flip through a bunch of different notebooks. So this is my main, like everything that I've since done in terms of language studies kind of has been spawned off of this one, if you will. So the next big one that I have is, and we're just gonna move that off there, I have my Korean notebook. So this is actually my first Korean notebook, and I thought it would be fun as part of this video to do a little flip through. So this was from my Korean studies from 2017 until 2020. So this is, you know, 3 years worth of information. So you can see here, I have my index, and I really don't do a lot about my index. When I first started, I was trying to do a topics index. So I have, you know, greetings, days of the week, saying sorry, A is B, have and have not, like all of that. And then I kind of stopped because I just started getting too much information to really kind of keep up with the index. So I have my alphabet, and this is like the first time I ever wrote out the full alphabet. So this is no longer how I write at all at this point. My handwriting style is quite different now. And I did go through and I have all of the letters with the stroke patterns, the sounds, so in its initial, middle, and final. And oh my gosh, can I flip pages? No, I can't. So this was a great resource when I was learning to write the alphabet, and especially because I'm left-handed, my natural tendency would be to go backwards, and so I try really, really hard to follow the stroke patterns as you're kind of supposed to, because it does make a difference, I think, in like how it actually looks. And I don't know, somebody who actually speaks and writes in Korean who is a righty, like let me know if you think my writing looks weird, but I do try as much as possible to follow the kind of appropriate stroke pattern, so that was why I spent the time to actually do this. So lots and lots and lots of alphabet. Come on. There we go. And then I started with my Talk to Me in Korean. So I have kind of simplified, but basically this is what I will do to this day is I will box the level and the lesson. So 1.3, level 1, lesson 3, box it in burgundy. I have the date to the right, and then I have some kind of box with this like peachy that has what the topic is, and like I still do that to this day. I did have this page that I did with days of the week, and I used to refer to this a ton when I was doing my headers in my bullet journal. Now I know the days of the week because I've done it for so much that I don't need to look at this, but when I was first learning them, I would do this to make sure that I wasn't messing up vowels specifically, because a lot of times what I would do when I first started is I would do, for example, like this 수요일, I would do the O, like I would do this way as opposed to this way. Like I would basically flip the vowel just because my brain didn't quite like separate them out yet. But now that I've been doing them enough, I think I do them all correctly, hopefully. I probably have messed up a couple of them, but I try to do them as correctly as possible. So going through, I do sometimes like do important to remember or underline or whatever, but most of the time I just will have whatever the topic is, like here. And for a while I did the copper pen, but then I ran out of ink in the copper pen. So yeah, this is like 3 years of Korean studies. So for a couple of them that I wanted everything, but it was too much for me to handwrite, I did actually print them out. I actually started a list also of verbs that I knew, so I could refer back to that. I don't really refer back to them. I should probably refer my Sino-Korean numbers because I always get a little bit iffy around like 7 and 8. I think I sometimes will flip. 1 through 5 I'm usually pretty good about though, that's good. Particles, this one, oh, this was for a different notebook. Then I've got my native Korean numbers. These ones I should definitely review because guess what? Also, I probably am good up to about 5 on these. This one, I wanted to have all of the ages from 1 to 100, but there was no way I was gonna write that out, so I just printed that. Another one that I printed and stuck in. Had a couple of those for a while where I was printing and I stuck them in. Now I kind of will simplify my notes a little bit more rather than printing and sticking and stuff, just because I really want to get that handwriting practice. This one I wanted to jump to a new page, so I just put a picture in here, but normally I don't usually do pictures in this notebook, just depending on if I want to make the page layout work a little differently. So verbs, as you can see, I kind of abandoned that page. So this is where I start kind of boxing the main grammar point that we're going to talk about for that lesson. This was when I was doing how to study Korean, so I just had a list of vocabulary and then I kind of stopped doing that. Oops, this is some more examples, printed smaller. Up. So let's try and do this one a little faster. And there I started using smaller pens, which actually really helped with my handwriting being neater, I think. So lots and lots of lessons. And my notes aren't really anything fancy. I use the PDF notes that they give with the Talk to Me in Korean lessons. I actually print them out on scrap paper, and I go back through and I recopy them, but I will like shorten, like only use certain of the sample sentences, or I'll lay it out a little bit differently just so that I have the information. But it's really good like handwriting practice so that I start getting the muscle memory for how to spell words and that kind of stuff, which I think it has helped, even if my level is still pretty basic, I would say. Like I haven't made tons and tons and tons of progress, but I'm also not like fussed to go super fast. So this is just good exercise. This is actually a stamp I got when I was in Korea. So there. Do sometimes throw in some washi tape or stamps. Like this, for example, it wasn't enough space to really start a new lesson, so I just kind of filled that space in. But that's really the only reason I ever decorate in this notebook. Normally I don't. Whoop. So getting near the end. Oh dear. So I basically have a couple of pages left, like literally maybe 5 or 6 or something, like maybe 10 max. But what I did is I did a lesson on December 31st. And so what I decided is 2021, I wanted to start a new notebook because I was so close to finishing this one. So my next notebook is this one. So I really like these little A5 NUUNAs, or no, A6. These A6 NUUNAs, and I got this one, you know, way back when, and I had used it for a really long time. And so I was in Paris and they had this particular one for 50% off. So I was like, oh cool, I'll get that. And that'll be my next Korean notebook. So, cause NUUNAs can be kind of expensive. So I just labeled it my Korean notes notebook 2. And then I did picture. I actually think I did the exact same picture. Wait, did I do that? Oh no, this one doesn't have, I don't know why I thought I had this picture. It must be in my language log. So I just did a picture on that fly page since I knew I wasn't going to use it. And this time around, I actually looked up the word for index in Korean, and I'm starting out where I'm just doing, so basically Talk to Me in Korean level 5, lesson 18 to whatever, and I actually have since finished lesson 31. So it's on page 17. So we're going to actually go ahead and fill that. So 18 to 30, and we are on page 4 to 17. So basically that's just how I fill in my index, really simple. So I just went ahead and I continued with level 5. I was kind of torn whether I wanted to have all of level 5 in one notebook because I probably could have fit it, or well, close to, or if I wanted to split it by a new year, and I decided to go for the new year. So I will just go ahead and start level 6 right at the end of this page. Like I don't really skip a page between levels because I have kind of a clear marker, but in terms of the index, I will label like what page I finish on. So that is my new language notebook for Korean. Oops, so let's go ahead and reassemble everything. So the Korean language notebook that I've already finished, this just gets archived on my shelves. It doesn't even have an archiving sticker. I just kind of stick it in one of my shelves so I can pull it out and refer to it if I need to. And then this just stays on my shelf, really easily accessible. I also have, oh my gosh, this is my backlog. Oh no. Ooh. This is from a manga in Korean that my dad got me. And I just saved the little like the little paper. So these are all of my next, I just do a bunch of pictures all at once. And these will be the ones that I take through to do my monthly log. I will just grab one of these pictures, whichever one's on top, one of these pictures, whichever is on top, and do that for my next monthly log. So those just all live in there. And let's go ahead and do the pen. All right. So in terms of the notebooks I actually use frequently, these are the main ones. Obviously this one's finished. I have one other one that I do. So this is actually my current notebook for Italian. And I thought I would show you. This is actually one, I think I got this in a Bujo swap, and it's just a lined notebook that I would never have used for anything else, but it works really well for Italian. So basically I label the date and what lesson it is, and then I just write in my different notes. Anytime my teacher gives me, because we share a Google folder basically, so we have a shared folder on Google Drive, and so she'll drop documents in for me, and so I print them out just because I find it much easier to work with them when they're printed on paper, especially while we're on Skype together. So everything that I've done chronologically is in here. All of the documents are also organized chronologically in the folder that we share. So you'll see here, and I do print them on scrap paper just to kind of use up pages that I've already printed on. And so this is, I'm on my third round of Italian classes. So basically this was the end of my first round of lessons, and then this is the start of my second round of lessons. So I put, if I have homework, I do corrections on them, I write notes from whatever we were talking about, either on Google Drive or if she drops it in the Skype chat box. Sometimes if we have notes that we did, I will print them out. But this is just a really good resource for me to go back through, and I've got different grammar things, I've got different reading exercises, so I can go back and re-look through all of those. So this was the end of my second round of classes, and this is actually the start of my third round of classes, which is what I'm currently working on. So you'll see here we did conjunctive, subjunctive, not conjunctive, subjunctive, gosh. This was a document that we were using. I usually print them smaller, but for some reason I printed that one at full size. So just various things that we are working on, and I try, for example, I wrote on the bottom of this, because we had notes for the song that we were working on, and then I've got my little notes in here. So I'm hoping that I can actually fit through the end of this round of classes. So that would be basically 30 hours of Italian classes in this notebook. This is a song we worked on, I think, at the end of my first round of classes. And the other thing that I have for Italian that I use is this. So I actually bought this book when I went to Italy in 2016, knowing that I couldn't read it at that point, but wanting to read it eventually. So if you saw my top 3 books to read in French, I read Agatha Christie. It's one of the first things that I read in pretty much any language. So I started reading, I've read Agatha Christie in French and in Spanish, and I'm working on it in Italian as well, just because they're short stories. So I almost always will choose one of her short story collections to start out. My preference is for Miss Marple. She's my favorite of the detectives. And I will do the short stories because you can read the story, they're between 10 and 30 pages long. And so you feel like you've accomplished something complete as opposed to just a chapter in a longer novel. And because I've read so much, I read a lot of mystery books. I've read a ton of Agatha Christie. I love sort of the mystery format. And so it's a really accessible style of writing for me because I typically know a lot of the vocabulary, and because it's all very sort of predictable vocabulary in a way, I find that it really works for me personally. Obviously, if you don't like mystery stories, this wouldn't work for you, but for me, it works really well as a way to kind of get my foot into reading in a foreign language. So I bought this book with that in mind, and I mentioned it to my teacher, and we actually read a story back during, I think, our first round. Which one? No, I'm trying to remember which one we actually did. This is one we're still working on. No, which page is it? 101. Oh, here it is. It was much closer than I thought it was. It's literally the next one. So this is one that we read the first time around. This was the shortest story in the book, which is why I picked this one. And so I just wrote up here in pencil that I did it with my teacher. And so basically what we did is we read it out loud. I didn't actually underline a lot of stuff in this one until about this page, but I did go back through that I wanted to kind of see, and we talked about some of the different, so for example, they use past In French, we call it like past simple, and it's this special like literary past tense form, and they use it in Italian as well. So we talked about that a little bit. We talked about some of the vocabulary. So I do just mark that in pencil. And I did this specifically because this was something I worked on with my Italian teacher. If I'm reading by myself, I almost never write in pencil anymore just because it slows me down too much and it makes it so I don't actually like to read. So the one we're working on now is, oops, this one. I did the same thing where I marked it that I read it with her, and this one I actually have more stuff marked down because she was reading it aloud to me, and so actually that really helped me understand more because I understand spoken Italian. Like if I read this, my brain will go, I don't know all of these words, but if I read it aloud to myself, I understand more stuff just because the pronunciation helps me out. So I was able to mark down, and I wrote down either, I've since gone back through and like looked up words, but I also wrote down like if I had a suspicion about what it meant, I would write that down. This one, for example, I did the accent because I wasn't sure where the stress was going to go. So when she said it, I marked that down. So this is one of the things that I do with my teacher. And so I'm hoping, you know, after we finish this story, I will have read 2 stories out of the book, and I think there's like 10 or something like that. So I'm hoping that I can get to a point where I can actually start reading this book more, because one of my goals for 2021 is to read this book in like in its entirety so that I have a book in Italian under my belt. So that is kind of my like Italian notes. And then I have 2 more notebooks. So one of them I have definitely done a story before. So this is actually the prototype of my collaboration with CHOOSETODO, but it fits this notebook, so I just went ahead and used it. So I have this Korean notebook that I got when I was in Korea that's specifically for like a health journal, but I have since like adapted it for my own uses. And this is one of those neglected notebooks where I did this for a little while. I think I did like 6 pages or something. 5? No, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4. I did 5 pages. Yep. I did 5, and I actually have done one. I did one in January of this year, and then the previous one was in July of last year. So I don't do it very frequently. This is, again, one of those things that I would love to get in the habit of doing more, but because I have kind of a very set morning routine, I don't necessarily have time to add in other things. And so a lot of this kind of stuff falls to the wayside. So that might be something that I need to like rework when I'm on my summer holidays, is have kind of an adapted summer routine where I do some more language studies, which is typically honestly what happens every single summer. And then once I go back to school, I kind of pare things back because I'm busier at work. So this is another of my language notebooks. And then the final one, and this is the one that I'm kind of the most sad about, because this was a total flop. So this is a NUUNA. This is actually the Paris city. Yeah, it's the Paris like light map kind of thing, which I think it looks so cool. So I got this notebook and I started doing, I think it's Yellow Journal on Instagram. He has a like resource notebook for English, and I tried to do that for Korean, and honestly it was too big of a job, and let's be real, I don't study that way, so it didn't really work. So I actually did do my intro page, and obviously my pen, it hadn't fully dried by the time I closed the cover, but whatever. So I did go through and I kind of put in my own index, and I did a bunch of pages because this was going to be like a reference notebook, and so I needed a lot of indexing so that I could split things out by topic. And as you can see, I have actually started some things on this, but you'll see what happened. So I went through and I did the alphabet again, sort of more, I think I started this maybe 2 years ago. I don't even remember exactly when I started it. So this was kind of a more up to date at that time version of my handwriting. And then I started doing references for things that I wouldn't necessarily want to like flip back through in my Korean notebook because everything is sort of mixed together. I tried to organize things in a more like logical way for my brain. So Sino-Korean numbers, native Korean numbers, talking about doing like how you use both of them, age, and again, I printed that out, how to say how old are you, and I am X years old. I then also had time. So you'll see like I did like number related things first. So time, the date, I did time markers, question words, adverbs of frequency, quantity, and qualifiers, and I left space to kind of add in more things whenever I got to them. And then I stopped. I literally had a bunch of post-it notes planning out a whole bunch of different things, like doing vocabulary, like for family, for jobs, for animals, for food, like all of that, and I just didn't get to it. So I was like, okay, we're gonna reuse this for something else. So I started doing German lessons in here. So I found Learn German with ANJA on YouTube, and I really like her format. So I basically did this and I took notes when I did the lesson. So I actually went through and I did 8 lessons and then I stopped. And guess what? This notebook is completely blank. So I have a feeling this one is going to be a language notebook, but maybe sort of a haphazard smorgasbord of languages. Smorgasbord? I think it ends with a D. Anyway, of languages. And I'm a little bummed because I was hoping to have like a really nice, pretty language notebook, but like, let's be real, that's just not how I learn. And so I will make use of it because it's a really nice notebook. I don't want it to go to waste or anything like that. And since I've already started with language stuff, I will continue. I had this thought that I would do my Korean notes, like when I finished this one, that I would just move into here, but I really like having my Talk to Me in Korean lessons in this side, so I figured do all of my Talk to Me in Korean stuff in here, and then if I get to either a different language or a different style of studying or whatever, then I'll continue in here. So for example, whenever I finish this notebook, maybe I'll do any future Italian notes in here. I don't know, we'll see. So I do still have this idea that I'll go back to German at some point. I do want to work on Arabic. I do obviously want to keep up with Korean and with Italian. But as you can see, I don't actually have that many study notebooks. My main study notebooks are honestly for Talk to Me in Korean, but almost everything else aside from this Italian notebook, almost everything else is more of a tracker or like writing styles, because that's typically what I end up writing down. So it has to be kind of a specific reason for me to actually take notes like that, which is the main reason that this one flopped. I already have dedicated notebooks for the 2 languages I do take those kind of notes for, and so I just didn't really have a need for this one. But I think in the future I will find a way to use this notebook, so I'm holding on to it for right now and we'll see what happens. So that is my update. I hope that it was kind of interesting to see inside all of my notebooks, because I know it's been a while since I've done that. I think I've done like a Korean language update at some point, and I've done an Italian language update at some point, but I haven't really gone through all of my notebooks in a while. So I wanted to take the time to do that. I also wanted to take the time to sort of chat about my particular style of language studies, because I know that what I do is not I would say it's not what a lot of people expect from a study account, which I am not a study account. Like, I think we can all agree on that. So I just wanted to kind of chat about my philosophy behind language studies and all of that, because it is a very personal thing to kind of figure out for yourself. And I always find it really interesting to see how other people study. So I wanted to kind of chat about that in case you all were interested in hearing some more about that. So that is all I had for you guys for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any comments or questions, let me know down below. Let me know if there's any other sort of language content you'd like to see from me. I do try and update things periodically, but because this is sort of a lifelong hobby, I don't necessarily have anything major or groundbreaking on a regular basis. So if there are things that you'd like me to chat about more, let me know. And with that, I will see you in my next video. Bye. Hey guys, so if you've made it all the way to the end of this video and are actually watching my end screen and you're not subscribed to my channel, I would really appreciate it if you would. There's a little button right there for you to do it. And if you're interested in watching some more of my videos, I have links to 2 of my older videos off to the left there, so you can check those out if you would like to, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.